निवासिनि विष्णुविलासिनि जिष्णुनुते.
Hi guys, so finally today we have Sanjeev Sanyal, without whom this channel would probably not exist, because if I had not read his book Land of Seven Rivers, I would still be a pretty much anti-India sort of a person, anti-Hinduism, that everything in our past was bad. I was just a classical liberal, although I was a commie up until 2018, but in 2021, reading his books, coming across his interviews with Shekhar Gupta, that's when I decided to look into his books, and that's when everything changed for me. So thank you, sir. Huge, many thank you for joining my live stream and my podcast.
It's a pleasure, Ranjan. So let's get going.
Yeah. Today, Sanjeev Sanyal sir has discussed economics, history in many other podcasts. He will continue to do so. We are getting to his writing style and how he covers so many different genres. He writes fiction, non-fiction, history, economics, and also economic surveys. So today's topic is the art of writing itself. But sir, first and foremost, you seem to be a person who avoids or runs away from cliches, cringy cliches at all costs. To us outsiders, you are sort of a whistleblower who grew up in elite circles, who still lives in elite circles, who comes from a family of revolutionaries, and now you are the chief economic, one of the chief economic advisors to the most popular leader in the world. How then are you still calling out people's BS? How are you still critiquing people when necessary? How are you still pointing out hypocrisies of these same people, similar people you have always worked with? How is that happening? How did you become such a person?
Well, difficult for me to say that. It's not a question anyone else has asked me, I must admit. Well, I did, there is a bit of a rebellion in the Sanyals, as you may know. So in some sense, we have always been a little bit skeptical of it. But the thing is that I happened to grow up in Kolkata of the 1980s. And it was full of a certain kinds of cliches, which looked completely absurd when I just simply looked around me. Because, one thing was being said and completely different thing was happening. All this deep concern for human rights, even as the Mori Jhapi massacre was being done within, a couple of hours drive of Kolkata. It's not some deep interior where it was all happening. And, all the talk about improving quality of life, even as, things were clearly deteriorating in Bengal. I mean, I grew up in an environment where, 6-7 hours of power cuts were par for the course. You may have heard it from your elders about this phenomena. So I keep saying that, the sheer absurdity of the situation, I do come from a solidly upper middle class background. But I have actually done my homework by kerosene lamp because there was no power. And the sheer absurdity of, claims about how we were making progress in the middle of all of that made me somewhat of a low tolerance for BS that I have to this date. And then I went to Delhi University. And remember which years I was in Delhi University, between 1989 and 1991. And what happened in those years? The Berlin Wall fell, the Soviet Union collapsed, our own economy fell apart, and then we began in 1991 to do reforms. But amazingly, throughout it all, our textbooks were still the same because the curriculum hadn't changed. So here I am with the Soviet Union having collapsed and our own economy being reformed and all kinds of such changes happening. But in my textbook, it is written 5-year plans, wonderful, Soviet Union. There were some papers by some chap called Brzezinski. I still remember the name, a strange name, about how wonderful all this collectivization was. I mean, the sheer utter rubbish that was being bandied about as knowledge has kind of given me this somewhat aggressive view towards bullshit.
So even when I was studying in class 9 and 10, even in our environmental science books, we were still learning about 5-year plans only and how great they were.
Yeah, so you can imagine. So, I have therefore developed this nose for, this kind of intellectual bullshit. And of course, I had to, if I don't quite fit, I know I march to a different band. So you can imagine that it meant that growing up I couldn't actually understand what most of these conversations were about. And, how great conversations were happening in College Street, or shows called College Street, in the coffee house. And when I went to coffee house, I was just shocked. I mean, there was just rats running around. The whole place was dirty.
Right.
What you see today is, by the way, the cleaned up version.
Yeah.
And, I could see that we were just glorifying poverty and defeat and lack of success.
So,
And this is what a defeated people end up doing. They glorify defeat.
Yeah. That was actually one of my later on questions, that while writing that fiction, that hilarious collection of short stories, how did you research about College Street, Kolkata? Because you must have left that place long time back. Did you remember all the details? Because it's so accurate. It seems like a conversation that anyone can listen to even today if they go into College Street, Kolkata.
So I had obviously gone there before, but when I research something, I visit the place again, because you have to refresh the whole thing. So I did make a specific visit to the place. Maybe a couple of years before I wrote that. So maybe somewhere, when did I publish this? 2018.
Yeah.
So maybe 2015, 14 or 15, I had revisited the place. After, I believe, it was given a coat of paint. So what you see today is the upgraded version.
Yeah.
When I visited it many years ago, late 80s or 90s, early 90s, there were cobwebs there, which... the spiders that probably personally knew Lord Minto. So there was just a disaster. I mean, there was literally you sit there. I remember seeing rats running around at the back.
Oh, great.
I don't know if those rats are still there, but
yeah,
it was that bad.
Yeah, it's good for animal rights. So what kind of a reader were you? Were you a voracious reader other than your academic books as well, growing up?
I was a reader, but very eclectic. I'm not somebody who is going to read Shakespeare unless forced to.
Yeah.
I of course used to read a lot of comics. So I read. At one stage I owned the entire Amar Chitra Katha series till that time. So the first 100 Amar Chitra Kathas I think I owned.
I see.
I'm sorry I've lost them, because they would have been probably quite valuable if I had them today. Yeah. And then Asterix comics, Tintins, and so on. And then I used to read a lot of, lot of stuff. There was one series called Alfred Hitchcock and the Three Investigators. Probably nobody reads them these days, but they were like, and there were Hardy Boys. Those were. And then I wasn't a fan of Enid Blyton. I found them a bit too, I don't know, too chocolatey, not my thing.
Yeah.
But then there were also Abanindranath Tagore's had this great book on Mewar.
Yeah.
I forget the name.
Rajkahini.
Rajkahini.
Yeah.
So I used to read various kinds of things. Then those days, encyclopedias of various kinds. So I used to actually like reading through encyclopedias. Rather than literary things,
right?
And science journals and all kinds of things. I mean, I can't say there was any particular pattern.
Okay.
Reading things, I've read all kinds of random things, but yeah, I'm not one for reading very literary type of things. As I said, I suffered through Macbeth.
Yeah.
One more. Which one was it?
Julius Caesar.
No, I think the one with Shylock in it. What's it called? The Merchant of Venice.
Yeah.
That's basically because in those days, ICSC and ISC, you had to read those.
Yeah.
But the stuff I read were very often all kinds of different things. I would not say there was any clear pattern to it.
Were you writing a lot as well? Essays and stuff? Essay competitions?
No. I am not. In fact, people would have been entirely surprised to hear at age 18, if you would ask my teachers or my classmates or something, that I was going to become well known as a writer, and that too of history or fiction or something like that. They would have laughed at you, because I was very much a maths and science type.
Oh.
So yeah, even today, I'm one of those strange people who reads nature or science or something for fun. Okay. So. I'm not the typical literary type, so to speak.
So, when did you first start to think about writing?
See, you have to remember, writing is partly what I do as an economist. So I was actually writing articles for Financial Express back when I was in college.
Yeah.
So and then even after I began working in finance, remember what I did? I was an economist. So I covered India, then I covered bigger and bigger spaces, parts of Asia, and then ended up as Deutsche Bank's global strategist. So all of that requires writing. So in that sense, I'm a professional writer, not for the general audience, but for a specialized audience. But I was writing, and some of it, this economic stuff, would end up in newspaper articles and things like that. So I did also write for a general audience, but in that specialized space. I wasn't becoming a writer in that sense. So my profession was writing. But somewhere in my early 30s, I was at that time living in Singapore. And it was a hot Sunday afternoon, I think. Maybe I had a good mangsho bhat lunch, I don't remember. But it was a nice hot day. The AC was running. I had my laptop. And for reasons that I can't... I had some loud music playing.
Okay.
I think in those days, I used to listen to a band called Era quite a lot. And I decided to type out, off the top of my head, a short story.
Okay.
And then I wrote another random short story.
Okay.
And then after a while, I had a bunch of them. And I don't remember exactly which one I started with, but I had after a while quite a few short stories. So I said, what the hell, just for a laugh, let me try and publish them.
Okay.
So I stapled them all together and sent it to various publishers. And at that stage, I had never published anything. I had never literally done nothing related to publishing. So pretty much everybody told me that everybody refused to publish them.
Okay.
And later on, I discovered that publishing short stories is literally the most difficult thing you can do. I think publishing poetry is even more difficult. But basically, publishers hate short stories.
I see.
And so part of the reason is that everybody with some literary pretensions writes short stories and sends it to them. So I think that's one of the reasons. But anyway, so somewhere in 2005 or so, I had gone through a round of trying to do this and essentially being told that I was not going to be published. They were polite about it, I suppose, but nobody published it. But as a result of this, I did get in contact with Penguin.
Okay.
And by this point, I was sort of becoming reasonably well known as an economist. So those guys said, we won't publish your short stories, but since you are now sort of like an up-and-coming economist, why don't you write a book about India's economic rise? So my very first book is called The Indian Renaissance, The Rise of India After 1,000 Years of Decline, is a result of that conversation.
I see.
I was not trying to write it.
Okay.
So I was not trying to publish there because remember, but this book was in some ways an easy book to write because it sort of dovetails what I anyway did for a living.
Right.
And so I wrote this book in 2005 and 6, and I think in 7 it came out. So for those people discovering this book now, do remember that it's almost a decade old.
Yeah.
2 decades old.
Yeah.
So some of it is a little out of date. But anyway, so this was when I published that book. And that book did rather well, surprisingly. And so then I happened to have taken a sort of time out from my finance career, and I went traveling around India with my kids and so on. And the result of that was the book Land of Seven Rivers. And that became a super hit. So now I went from being some random guy who was just writing for the lark to writing a book that was actually out of my field. So that is actually in some ways the first book I wrote outside of my field of comfort, although it's my second book. And then so now I was properly into writing. So I was, as it happens to be, I had gone back. I had spent some time in India and gone back to living in Singapore. So I lived in an island city, and the Indian Ocean was something that was around me, and it was pretty obvious that there was a huge amount of Indian influence everywhere. I mean, you go anywhere in Indonesia, you go to Bali for a holiday, you go to Angkor Wat, you can see Indian influence. But what struck me is that there is no book that talks about this, how this Indian influence came about. So I said, why complain? Let me write it. So I discovered that there were some writers like Lincoln, Shastri, etc., who have talked about India had some ports and some, the Cholas went and did some voyage. But it was not in any way connected to what was on the other side. So it was from a purely shore-bound view. What about the interconnections?
Right.
And I was similarly reading stuff in Indonesia and all those places about, some Indians came and did this. But the fact that there were interconnections on both sides was not written about by almost anybody. So I said, by this point, since I had become reasonably confident as a writer, so I researched it, and this was the book that I actually researched properly to actually write a book.
I see.
And so I wrote this book, Ocean of Churn, that published in 2016, I think it was published.
Yeah.
And that book did well. Now, by this point, I was a reasonably well-known writer because 3 best-selling books.
Yeah.
So now I could go back to my publisher and demand something. So I said, will you now publish that book of short stories? So they very sort of sheepishly and reluctantly said, okay. And so I published this book, which is
Life Over 2 Years.
Life Over 2 Years. So they are actually, some of those stories had been written a full decade earlier.
I see.
Some new ones I wrote and updated them, like by visiting College Street and all these kinds of places. Because so that's how that book got published.
And that title story, Life Over 2 Years itself, did you research again by hanging out in those elite Delhi circles, or that was your life anyway?
No. So that was my life anyway. So you have to remember, I'm much into trekking and all those kinds of things that you may see from my social media. So I, every year, once or twice when I get time, I go off. So I was quite familiar with Ladakh. I was quite familiar with living in Singapore. That book starts with Singapore, And, Delhi elite circles are not difficult. I mean, I hang around in many of those spaces anyway. So many of those spaces, I have lived in Mumbai when I first began working. So there are stories related to Mumbai. And I have actually used the train to commute. So I actually quite familiar with the suburban train network, living in the suburbs and all that. So I have done all those things. So I know them. Some of it required some updating, but by and large, I was familiar with Delhi's elite circles because, even before I joined government, even as a financial markets guy, you attend conferences and all those people. And as I said, I was already familiar with the Calcutta universe. And I still visit Calcutta. It's not like I may not live there. But so I'm reasonably up to date with some of the stuff. And then Mumbai, which also, as I said, I've lived in Mumbai for several years. And I visited reasonably often. So I'm reasonably up to date with all these things. So I then took those and combined them into those satirical stories.
Now, before deciding to write a history book all of a sudden, did you feel a doubt that you will be hated by the actual academics in history academia?
Yes, I had anticipated that academics will take issue with the fact that I'm not a trained historian. Now, that didn't matter to me terribly, partly because I didn't think those books will go that viral. Frankly, so I didn't expect anybody to pay great attention to me in the first place. It's much later that, because those books became so widely read and so on. So it's only when I wrote Revolutionaries recently that I wrote it, with full cognition that they'll probably get investigated by professionals. So I wrote them more like fun books for myself and for people like myself who sort of went through a voyage of discovery on their own and discovered a somewhat different story from what they had been led on to believe. So I had not expected my books to end up getting taught in colleges and the children's versions, by the way, are taught widely in schools. And many colleges now teach my Ocean of Churn and Revolutionaries.
I see.
And so, I hadn't anticipated that at all. I had written it as a fun book.
Yeah.
There are many people who write fun books.
Yeah.
So, that was not my intention to be, at all taken that seriously.
Yeah, a lot of the things you came up with in Land of Seven Rivers, you discovered, have actually become mainstream narratives later on. And reading in 2021, I realized, okay, you wrote these things in 2013, so you were probably the pioneer in this narrative.
Yeah. So many people repeat many of my own ideas back to
Yeah,
me.
yeah,
A lot of the stuff about maritime history,
yeah,
the stuff about Ashoka, the not so great.
yeah,
And I'm quite surprised how quickly many of these things have become mainstream.
yeah,
My mainstreaming of the revolutionary movement, for example, has happened in just 18 months. I mean, many of the
yeah,
things I dug up are now commonplace, discussed on Twitter,
yeah,
and even I have people repeating it back to me, not
yeah,
realizing that I may be the source of it. So it's quite interesting to
yeah,
see all of this. And as I said, some of it is just lucky, right place, right time kind of thing.
yeah,
Uh, I had not, I had, all I was doing is writing books to push back against an existing narrative where nobody else seemed to be writing anything.
yeah,
And so I just began writing it. And let me forget, my biggest pushback problem in the beginning was at academia, which I hadn't thought I would penetrate in any way. My first problem was my own editors. You'll be
I see.
amazed the amount of times in the beginning I used to have to. I wrote, say, Hinduism, and the copy editor would edit it to Brahmanism, for just as an example, or things like that. Or they would come back, no, but Romila Thapar has said this. Yes, I know. And the point I'm making here is that she's wrong. So, that kind of thing, I had to push back. So I actually had, my problem initially was publishing. And I think people don't appreciate the extent to which the gatekeeping was done. You just couldn't get into seminars and conferences. Now, I wasn't trying to get into seminars and conferences because it didn't matter to me. I wasn't in that game. I was
Yeah.
financing my own research, so I didn't care about giving me a grant or anything. So that I didn't care about. My problem was simply not getting published.
Right.
And so, so I think that is a problem that has got changed over the last decade. But even into the early part of the last decade, in 2010, 2011, when things began to change,
Yeah.
when writers like myself or Amish, etc., began to emerge at about that time, these new narratives were, not easy to publish. And you will remember, even much more recently, there were problems with, for example, who was that? There was a publisher refused to publish about the Delhi riots, for example.
Monica Arora's book.
Monica Rosa's book. So I made a fuss about it, as you will remember.
Yeah.
So but it has become much more easy.
Yeah.
So that battle where you simply got deplatformed before you could get going, that battle over the last decade has got resolved.
Yeah.
It has doesn't so, and because that battle has got resolved, and we have kind of pushed. That is why academia is now more concerned about our influence in the narrative. Earlier, they didn't care because we weren't there in the narrative.
Yeah.
Or they could just say, these people are just trolls or whatever. Now we have published books. Many people have read it.
Yeah.
And so on and so forth. And so far, people have argued against my interpretations. Nobody has argued against my facts.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, so now you have, for example, Caravan magazine and all these guys having to write long 30-page articles about how evil I am. But that they will only do that and put in that effort because I broke through the first barrier.
Yeah. One of the recurring themes of all your recurring, let's say, aspects of all your books, every genre. In the 2008 book, which I absolutely love, even though I'm a pure art student, I had never read economics related to anything before reading that book, 2008 book, and then Land of Seven Rivers, then again fiction. They are so interesting to read. How are you doing that in every genre, even, and not without any background in writing?
Well, as I said, I do write for a living as an economist, and it is a dry subject. So I suppose I have tried to make economics writing also interesting. I don't know if I've succeeded, but I did try to make the economic survey more interesting over the 5 years that I was in the finance ministry and was editing and writing the economic survey. So I tried to make all kinds of changes. So I innovate and I try to get into, if, my simple rule of thumb is, if it's not interesting to me, it's unlikely it's interesting to the reader, and vice versa. So I try to write things which I think are interesting, questions, and kind of put them out. And because I'm not trying to sort of speak down to the audience and trying to prove how brilliant I am or how big how long the reference list is or whatever, I'm just trying to tell the story. I think the audience does kind of at some point appreciate that I'm not talking down to them. And therefore I'm taking them along that journey.
Right.
I think what feeds through to what you are calling interesting. I'm keeping you hooked.
Right. Do you read, have you read any books by Dr. Thomas Sowell?
I have read one of his books, but I have listened to some of his, one or two of his books I've read, forget which ones, but I've listened to several of his talks.
Yeah.
These are pre-podcast talks, so they are more like,
I read Dr. Thomas Sowell a lot. I've read like 5 books of his. And when I was reading your 2008 book, I was also reading parallelly Thomas Sowell's book. Both of them were so similar that they were interesting, but in a dry subject like economics. So I thought, is it because both of you are BAs in economics and not BSc in economics? Is that possible?
Well, I'm an MSc in economics, so that is not the point. I don't think that matters. Well, first of all, I actually discovered Thomas Sowell much later in life.
Okay.
So I only read Thomas Sowell maybe a decade ago. So you read him before, you discovered him before I did.
Oh, achha.
Okay. But yeah, I mean, I have read other writers. There are many good writers in economics that exist. It's so I can say that there are good writers in economics. Plus, economics is a live subject. It's not just that you write theory somewhere. It's debated every day. And it's happening in magazines and newspaper articles. So there is a fair amount of interesting writing in economics going around. And remember, as a financial markets guy, I had to make my points reasonably interesting as well, just for the audience that I was dealing with. Remember, I'm dealing in a crowded space where there are lots of ideas going out. My newsletters on how the economy was faring, etc., in whatever happened to be covering at that day. Let's say the Chinese economy. Let's say that's what I was writing about. And then there are several others writing about it. So you have to really make it interesting and catching, that you create a repeat audience who then sort of follows your story as, next month when you write it, they were more likely to read yours than 200 other people's.
Right.
So I suppose those are the things that may have forced me, because over and over writing meant, and also it has to be written within a certain thing. One thing you will notice, there are very few extra words in my writing. That's because there is a short format, right? I can't write long pothas because financial markets guys are not going to read them. So I have to make a sharp point. I have to make it quickly, and it has to be something that is clear. Even if you're unclear about something, be clear that you're unclear about that.
Right.
Okay. So that, because in the end, you can either buy or sell or hold a stock, let's say, or a foreign exchange currency or whatever. You can't say on one hand and that hand and both hands, maybe on every hand, and fuddle around. Nobody's going to bother. It has to be clear. I think this economy is in bad trouble because of these reasons. If this happens, this is a red light. Sell out or buy or whatever it is that you should do in those circumstances. So again, going back to the point about there can't be any bullshit there, because it has to be clearly actionable. Some decision has to be taken.
Right.
So the same principle is there if you read my economics writings. So I am very clear that in the end, it should be. You may disagree with me, but it is very clear that something, one way or the other, has been arrived at. And even if it is, if the point of all the research is that we don't know, then I'm very clear. I will say that after all this research, we cannot tell what is going on. But I state it clearly. Now, why is this important? Because either you can do a policy. Yeah, I'm a policy maker now. Here also, you can either introduce the policy or not introduce the policy or tweak it. I'm not here to think navel gaze about maybe this can be done. That was also bad, not a bad idea. Let's go and have a chai after this. I have not interest in that, and I have to manage this economy.
Right.
COVID happens. I have to do something about it.
Yeah.
So this is why I do that. Now there is a trick I use, which I think is I would like to popularize it in order to get good writing, particularly in non-fiction. So this is really for non-fiction. Is state the opposite of whatever it is you're going to state, and see if it makes sense. Okay, if it does not make sense, then what you are saying also is not a meaningful statement. So let me illustrate my point. You will very often see some report will come, book will come, somebody, we should improve the efficiency of the economy. Now that is, in my view, violates this rule, because let's say the opposite. We should not improve the efficiency of this economy. That is a meaningless statement.
Yeah.
Yeah. Therefore, stating that we should improve this efficiency of the economy is also a meaningless motherhood statement.
It's too obvious.
Unless you're saying we should do it by doing A, B, and C.
Right.
So that's why all this motherhood statements, this is a very simple thing to judge by. If somebody says something, just say the opposite and see if it makes any sense. If it doesn't make sense, then what you are saying also makes no sense. Because the opposite is not an alternative.
Yeah.
Therefore, what you are saying is actually not anything other than a motherhood statement.
Yeah. And it's probably just signal theory to tell someone that, see, I advocated for economy becoming more efficient.
Yeah, but it's actually, so what? Everybody's advocating.
Right.
It's like saying we should all be happy, or there should be world peace.
Yeah. Now, how does a writer separate whatever their goals or agenda is from the writing craft itself? Because a lot of times I'm seeing in at least movies, some both on left wing, right wing, etc., that people prioritize their agenda so much that they end up making a bad movie that absolutely no one can watch. That happens in terms of books as well.
First of all, I'm mostly not researching to write a book.
I see.
First two books I wasn't looking to write the book. The very first book I had the research, because I worked in that field, Land of Seven Rivers.
Yeah.
Ocean of Churn, I was actually traveling around and collecting information for fun. Then it just turned up as a book.
I see.
Ocean of Churn also, although I had more of a clear idea that it may turn up in a book, I was collecting and traveling around just for the sake of my own interest, really. So my books are not the result of having a clear end goal of actually publishing. I'm collecting information for fun. At some point, I've collected enough information, or I've written enough short stories or done something that I then feel, okay, let's kind of get on with it and publish it. Now, I have that privilege because I don't earn my living from this.
Right.
So if you were a writer who actually earned their living from doing this, or they're going about, maybe you would have a different view of the matter. I am in just collecting stories and epigraphy and information and data and other things, just for the heck of it.
Yeah.
In fact, my problem is a slightly different one. I usually have tons of information just because I collected so much of it. But when I decide that, look, let's get a good, proper story going, how much to get rid of to make a coherent story?
Yeah.
I usually use only maybe 40% or 50% of the collected material for the actual book.
And go on.
Yeah, so therefore, I have a lesser problem. So the problem arises if you are starting out with an agenda that this is what I have to tell,
right,
and then find data for it.
Right.
Whereas I am actually just collecting data for the heck of it. It's not with any not even an agenda of writing a book.
Right.
So once I've got a heap of agenda, like the Revolutionaries book, it was just something I was curious about, partly because my own family history. Then I began to get more and more. Now, once your eyes sets to it, you begin to see it everywhere. But then you collect a lot of information,
Yeah.
and over time I just collected it. Then it appeared, enough of it was there that I could begin to sort of piece it together into a story and write it.
Yeah. And how different is the economic survey writing today for you? Is that just a boring, tedious day job you have to go through, or is that also
No, I don't
fun?
write the economic survey anymore.
I see.
I have moved on to the Prime Minister's Economic
Yeah.
Council. That is done by the Finance Ministry.
Right.
So yes, I may look at given some comments on the when the economic survey draft comes,
Yeah.
we may have a look at it and send some comments, but we don't actually write it anymore. This is
Yeah.
Anant Nageswaran's problem now.
Right. I read your paper on the AI, how to handle AI as well.
Yeah, so these are kinds of things I do write. Yes.
Yeah. How much
Because
time do you spend on them now?
Well, 90% of my time is spent on economic type stuff. Some of it gets published in public papers, but a lot of it doesn't. And a lot of it does get published, but you don't know I wrote it.
I see.
So yeah, I mean, that is a different world. So it's not the economic survey, but I do write working papers for the government. I do defend the government on various policies,
Right.
And so on. So yes, the bulk of my work is that.
Right. So how does your liaison between the Prime Minister and you happen? Because you are a domain expert. He is not. How are you going to explain to him by writing a paper?
No, so that's not for the Prime Minister's. That's not how I'm getting through to the Prime Minister or his office.
Yeah. How does he get the boiled down points?
So these are different things. So you have to understand where I am. I'm in the Prime Minister's Economic Council.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are two ways in which my job is to come up with reforms or processes or some changes or how to manage the economy or whatever it is. There are two ways it may happen. One is that it may come down to me.
I see.
Either the Prime Minister comes up with an idea or there are, let's say, some ministry has an idea. So those go up to the Prime Minister and they get sent to me. It's not like Prime Minister sitting and researching them. So I'll be sent this paper, have a look at this idea kind of thing, paper or whatever it is. It may be even from industry may have given some suggestions.
Yeah.
So somebody like me will look at it and actually do the research to see whether it's a good idea or a bad idea.
I see.
And then I'll go back and say that, look, this idea is a good one, this is a bad one, or this needs to be done, but this is a better way of doing whatever it is. This is one way. The other way is that we come up with ideas ourselves, or somebody gives us an idea which we research. So then, in which case, rather than top down, it is bottom up. Then we go and say, "Sir, this is a good idea." Maybe we'll then convince the relevant ministry. Sometimes they'll decide it's a good idea. Sometimes they'll decide it's a bad idea.
Right.
But so that is how that goes on. Now, this is different. Now, sometimes some of those ideas need to be put in public domain so that a conversation is had. There's a public conversation about the matter, or we want to inform people of a change we made, or just a good research piece that just to get sort of ideas flowing. So for example, let's take the one you just discussed, the point about regulating artificial intelligence. So this is a debate. Now, METI is the relevant ministry. They have a view on the matter. Industry has a view on the matter. I also have a view on the matter.
Yeah.
Now, it's in the nascent stage. There are people in the world, different governments in the world have view on the matter. UN has a view on the matter. OECD has a view on the matter. G20 has a view on the matter. So this is where the thing is not baked. So all I've done is I've put out one view of how to think about regulating AI. In the idea that, look, this is another way of thinking about it. Put it out there. Let there be a debate. Let that be a part of the conversation. Some of those ideas will find their way into another conversation. Maybe METI will like some of this. I will read METI's papers. So these working papers are precisely that, to get a public conversation going on a topic. Similar thing a little while ago I had done on patents, for example, IPR. There was another one I had done on national monuments, and so on and so forth. So basically get a conversation going so So that, and then sometimes I write in newspaper articles also. Sometimes those articles on some arcane topic, which may be very specialized in that field, but basically you need to get a conversation going, educate public, or just something that people need to know about. I have certain views about, for example, the way anemia data is collected in the country.
Okay.
So I'll write a newspaper article and put it out. Let there be a debate. Not everybody likes everything I write. Even maybe people would dislike it. In fact, very often these are things in which there are different views.
Yeah.
So one of the the ideas is to get that thing out there so that conversation can happen.
Now,
See, otherwise what happens, you have these closed door, opaque conversation, policy turns up.
Yeah. Now, coming back to fiction, your character development is also absolutely brilliant. All the protagonists of all your short stories are so interesting, and you see an evolution. You are already invested in them because you know a lot of your past, a lot of the past of that character as well. How are you managing that in such a short story?
Yeah, so you have picked up something actually which is a tough thing. One of although a lot of short stories are written, very, very few are published, and even fewer number actually become bestsellers. So the reason that short story writing is very, very difficult is that, well, they're short.
Right.
And you have to create the atmosphere, the character, the situation in very, very quick space. So how do you do that without diluting it and making it too long and all of that? So different people do it, so there is no right and wrong way of doing this. Different people do it in different ways. But this problem is a very tough problem to solve, which is why good short story writing is a very, very difficult art. In fact, I would say it's much more difficult than writing a novel because you have to do it really quickly.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you how I do it. Other people may do it in some other way. My trick in this, so to speak, is to take little bits and pieces and make it very, very vivid.
Okay.
So I may not even be describing the person, but I may describe the scene. And because you have been in that scene or you know that scene, you will fill in the details in your head yourself.
Exactly.
Okay. So, for example, there is one scene where there is a character who called the Bench by the Lake.
Yeah.
By the way, I don't mention it, but it requires no genius to realize that's Rabindra Sarovar.
Yeah.
And I know Rabindra Sarovar very, very well from because I used to actually be a part of a state-level athletics team.
Okay.
In the Rabindra Sarovar Stadium. I used to go there literally every day to train middle distance running.
Oh.
And one of the parts of the training was your warm-up was running around that big lake.
Okay.
I think 2-3 kilometers long, and that was our warm-up. And so I used to do that literally 5-6 days a week, irrespective of weather. And so I knew that lake very, very well. And typically there would be these benches where there were these old people sitting around, talking.
Yeah.
So that scene was there in my head. And if you take that journey, there are little bits and pieces which are there.
Yeah.
Which are, that old man he walks. There is a white border cricket club. There actually is a white border cricket club.
Yeah,
there.
I've played there for my school.
Yeah, you played there. So you know that scene. Yeah. Now, even those who have never seen that scene will have, because it's so vivid, they begin to fill in, they have seen something equivalent maybe.
Exactly.
And they fill it out in their head. So now when I mentioned that white border cricket club, you played there. So right in front of it, by the way, diagonally across from there, along the stadium wall, there is an athletics club. I don't know if it's still there. It used to be called the Athletic Training Center. It had a very name, ATC, Athletic Training Center. And there was a guy called Manav Moitro who used to be once upon a time national level middle distance runner, who was my coach.
Okay.
I wonder where he is because I actually have tried to look for him. Maybe somebody. He was a decent. He was a state champion and top 10 in India type of runner.
I see.
800 meters, 1500 meter runner, and so he was my coach, and I used to go there every day to run and all that. So I used to run around that thing. Now I know that. Therefore, I know that place very vividly. I know those trees. I know how people sit around them, the kinds of conversation they have. Because sometimes, once you're finished with your training, you kind of went there and sat there and all these people work. So I've been a part of those conversations. I've learned to swim, by the way, in Anderson Club, ILSS. That is right there.
Yeah.
So, I know that place very well because I learned literally how to swim there.
Right.
There's also an advanced training center there in ILSS. I used to, before taking on the running, I was actually in their state level swimming
I see.
training.
I see.
But it kept causing ear infections to me, which became rather. So then I gave up on it, and I took up athletics. So I know that scene very well, and to describe it, then I had to take out of that the essence of a thing here, a thing there, which are actually real. So very vividly describe, that he goes to his house, he takes a left turn at the Toyota showroom.
Yeah.
There is actually a Toyota showroom there. Right. Now, that wasn't there when I was growing up, but I later walked that route to see how much it had changed. So I added in those details. Now, those details are not needed for the story itself.
Yeah.
But once you add them in, that character builds out in your head in a vivid sort of way.
I see.
So similarly, there is the story about this called The Troll. So in there are again minor details which about the character. He's a sort of FTII student.
Yeah.
He's kind of hanging around there too long. Now there is this the what should I say? The sort of lefty student hanging around at university too long. PhD uncle problem.
Yeah.
He is a well-known phenomena.
Yeah.
So I didn't have to describe too much about him.
Yeah. Right.
But I needed you to kind of, just once I had described those bits and pieces, I put little bits and pieces. He was a student, but he was balding. So I've added those little bits. He has problems with his dad because his dad no longer wants to pay his fees for trying to do a job. So those things now. I don't have to take all the rest of the conversation because the reader has either heard of or probably even knows such people.
Right.
And therefore, they fill in the details themselves. So I've little bits and pieces once have been vivid. The rest of it, actually, I don't have to describe.
Now, sir, I guess in one way your 2008 book also could be called a history book because it's a book of the economic history of India. Now, the similarity between Ocean of Churn, Land of Seven Rivers and Indian Renaissance is that all these three books are tracking about 3,000-4,000 years of history. How do you then maintain a strong, tight narrative, fast-paced and short as well? How do you decide what to not keep in the book?
So this is actually a very difficult thing that writers have to do. They have to decide what they want to write about. And while they can allow themselves a little... See, other writers can do it differently. So I'm telling you how I do it.
Yeah.
I very strictly remain to the story I'm trying to tell. And maybe occasionally, once or twice, I'll make a little bit of a side thing. But by and large, I stick to the thing and keep it fast-paced. To me, fast-paced is important because I myself dislike things slow. I like slow books. I hate slow movies. So I hate slow sports also. So I like things being fast because I've got the point. Now tell me the next point.
Yeah.
So given my own predilection, I then get rid of all the. So this requires you to rewrite and edit repeatedly,
right,
till you have brushed away all the excessive words. So getting rid of excess words, unnecessary subplots, and so on. And one of the difficulties inexperienced writers have is that because they have written something which they really researched, etc., and later they find that it's not a part of the story, they'll still leave it in there because they have done some hard work.
Exactly.
Now, this is something that an experienced writer strictly does not do. So you will completely, have to be willing to be brutal about the...
Exactly. Yeah.
And this is what I do. As I said, no more than 40% of how much I research finds it in my book. So everywhere there's lots more information I can give you on every piece. Every one of those episodes, I can give you another, triple the amount of
Right.
information.
Yeah.
But I'm not giving it to you because I want to keep the story
Yeah.
flowing fast.
Yeah. I guess this is what all artists have to do deal with as well. I'm a music producer and I do it all the time. Hans Zimmer says that you have to be ready to kill your babies. Maybe you came up with a sub melody which doesn't fit into the arrangement, but the sub melody on its own is really great. But you have to really avoid that melody.
Yeah, you should keep it aside for some other place.
Yeah.
Many of these things have other uses.
Yeah.
These sub melody may have another use.
Right.
But you shouldn't somehow become a slave to that creation.
Right. Right. How
And,
much?
So yes, so I that's exactly the problem
Yeah.
that I face as a writer as well. You have to be willing, but there are people who like this kind of flowy kind of thing where you go off, and I dislike that. And so I am willing to slash and burn, and I like hard lines. So even in my music, I like a little harsher voice. I don't like the nice surili awaz.
Right.
This is not my thing.
When did you start listening to non-surili awaz things? Forever?
That's my thing. Right from childhood.
Great. Can you tell us some of your favorite artists growing up and now?
So they are that different. I like little rougher voice, rougher music. While I don't like heavy metal, but I like hard rock kind of music. I also like Vedic chants for pretty much the same reason. So I like Vedic chants rather than say
bhajan maybe.
A bhajan.
Right.
Yeah. No, they are nice bhajans. Don't get me wrong. So there are some that I like, but even there, the singer will usually be a little rougher voice kind of style.
Yeah.
So Asha Bhosle, not Lata Mangeshkar, if you want to put that in clear terms for one of listeners. So so I prefer a slightly bass, grainier voice, rougher music, and slightly sharper cuts.
Right.
I dislike a long alap, for example.
Right.
Get to the point.
Yeah.
That's the general view.
Yeah.
So that's why. So, there are writers, for example, who other people may find, good. So all art is obviously extremely subjective.
Yeah.
There are people who like slow moving, moody, those kind of things.
Yeah.
But, I can't deal with it. So if a book, for example, if on a book title it says somewhere poignant, I'm definitely not reading it. As far as I'm concerned, I don't read poignant books. Similarly, in any Bengali book or movie or something, if anybody says Opurbo, definitely out.
Yeah.
Opurbo has for me a red flag.
Right. And how much this seems to be a very agile and no nonsense aspect of yours again, and how much of this is coming because of your sports background?
Yeah, it's probably because I always played a lot of sports. I can see a Mudgal right at the back.
Yeah.
That's a Mudgal, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. So I've always had into sports. And I've done all kinds of things. I have one of India's first paragliding licenses back in 1990. Yeah. I've done whitewater kayaking, canoeing to a pro level. I have a instructor grade license for both kayaking and canoeing.
I see.
Although I'm so out of shape, I don't think I'm any good at it anymore.
Okay.
But so all of these skills have now been lost. There are some things that happen with age, but I have done all of these things to some level.
How so much sports? Was your family pushing you into it, or were there sports people in your family as well?
So I come from a family where my dad used to be a national level squash player.
Oh.
And so on. So and by the way, since everybody knows the revolutionary streak in my family, I don't realize that all of it derived out of the fact that we historically were used to run akhadas.
Oh.
So there is a neighborhood in Varanasi called Bengali Tola. And now
Yeah.
Tol is a Vedic school.
Yeah.
People have this impression that everybody gets up in the morning and does some Vedic chanting. That's not the only thing that happens in a Tola. You're also doing Kushti
Yeah.
and Alkham and sword fighting and all of this kind of thing.
Hmm.
So all these tols had an akhada attached to them.
Hmm.
And the reason my great grandfather and grandfather's family got involved in revolutionary movement, but because these akhadas became a part of the Anushilan Samiti network.
Yeah.
So therefore, there is this sports thing very much there,
I see.
and this is there on both sides of my family. So this is my father's side of the family.
Hmm.
So if I take my mother's side of the family, let's go my mother's side of the family. My mother's grandfather also has the same surname, Sanyal, Nalinaksha Sanyal.
Hmm.
Not related, but they come from the same Barindra community.
I see.
And he was a village boy who grew up in a village called Doradaho
Okay.
in near Karimpur.
Okay.
So this is, I think, in Mushidabad or Nadia,
Yeah.
near the border.
Yeah.
So he was a village boy, and he was also used to go to his neighborhood akhada,
Hmm.
and he was into kushti and all these kinds of things. And he was reasonably well known, and he also got involved, by the way, in the Bhaga Jatin's Jugantar movement through his akhada.
I see.
And but he was a very good swimmer. He once, just for the heck of it, swam down 100 kilometers from somewhere near his village to Kolkata.
I see.
I stopped along the way, but for a village boy, even taking a few rests along the way
Yeah.
with no backup to just swam down to Kolkata was some genuinely crazy thing. I think when he was a teenager, he did that. And Nalinaksha Babu, he was, of course, later became a PhD and all that, Dr. Nalinaksha Sanyal, LSc degree. But what is even today remembered by many of the older people in Kolkata was that he was an amazing sportsman even in his old age.
I see.
So he was one of the founders of, by the way, ILSS
Oh,
in Kolkata.
I see.
And into the 80s, when he was himself in his 80s, he used to go, if you know, in ILSS, there is this very high diving board
Okay.
into the lake.
Yeah, I've seen pictures of it.
Yeah. So he used to go to the top of that and dive off it when he was 85 years old into the lake.
Okay.
So, so there was always this bit of a sports kind of thing. He, by the way, also there was something called a Brotochari movement where he tried to actually attempted to save all these akhadas from the communist club being converted into communist clubs. This was in the 1950s and 60s. So he teamed up with a guy called Guru Shaday Datta.
Okay.
And they tried to actually revive the akhadas in traditional format and became known as the Brotochari movement, which is still, I believe, half around somewhere.
My school had Brotochari.
There you go. So Nalinakka Babu was one of the founders of the Brotochari movement.
I see.
So that Mudgal you're using there has something to do with him, perhaps.
Yeah, interesting. So, what kind of movies you watch now? Do you watch any Bengali movies?
I am not a great fan of Bengali movies in general. I was cured of them in the 1980s by Mrinal Sen.
Okay.
So I did like Satyajit Ray's movies. But I am actually a fan not of his art films so much, but of his detective ones and his musicals.
Yeah.
Rupiga in Bhagawain, Hirok Raja Deshe. So I was a fan of those kinds of Bengali films. In recent years, I have seen the odd one that I liked. I liked, what was that about ghosts?
Bhuter Bhavishyat.
Bhuter Bhavishyat. That was
brilliant.
quite good.
Yeah.
That was quite a nice one. Then there was another one which was about this guy who makes these things for movies, sets for movies and parts for movies. It was by
Kaushik Ganguly, I think.
I forget what it's called.
Yeah.
So I've seen a few. Since after Ritu Porno Babu and Mrinal Babu had destroyed my interest in Bengali films,
Right.
for a long time I stopped watching them. So in more recent times, I have begun to again see a few.
How do you think anyone appreciates them other than the directors themselves? Is there some signal theory going on that I will tell people that I watched a Ritu Porno movie and I liked it?
I have no idea. I disliked them in those days. As I told you, I dislike anything slow. So that slow moving lantern is slightly Some darkness in which one lantern is slowly shaking for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Look, I wasn't a big fan of it because that was my reality in the 80s.
Yeah.
Because there was darkness and there was a lantern.
Yeah.
So I didn't see why I should waste my good money to watch a movie where that
Right.
was also happening.
Yeah.
So, but I do think that, we need to get more. I mean, look, everybody talks about dominance of Bollywood, but that's poor excuse. Look at the South Indian movies.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't understand any South Indian language, but they have now been dubbed into all
Yeah.
kinds of Hindi films, and I watch them and enjoy them. In fact, Bengalis enjoy them as well.
Yeah.
So why is it that we can't make popular films? So I think we need to really expunge the ghost of this art film style. And get on with making proper commercial, fast-moving things. I'm
Yeah.
quite certain we are capable of it.
Sir,
But maybe you are artistic type. You should take up filmmaking.
yeah. Sir, we are at the time you were supposed to end at anyway. Do you have any more time to go on taking?
Yeah, we can go on for another 5-6 minutes. Yeah.
Okay. So that was my question only, that the only two movies I have watched 3 times in the cinema theater is Interstellar and Kantara. So what exactly is missing in the Bengali movie industry that we can't compete
So I
with
think Kantara is
South
a great
or Bollywood?
example.
Yeah.
Okay, Kantara is a great example of an Indian film made without any apology to the West. Okay, they didn't try to make any apology to any Western sensibility at all. In fact, a non-Indian or somebody who doesn't understand Indian culture would not have understood what that movie was
Yeah.
about, because it may even seem rather strange movie about some
Local superstition and stuff.
superstitions. But it really hit something in everybody's heart.
Yeah.
There was something
Yeah.
very raw about it,
Yeah.
right? And I think that is what great films are about. There's something raw about it. If you make it, this attempt to make it too refined has killed it.
Right.
And so and that's the same point I was making. That's the kind of music I also like listening to. I like a slight rawness to it. So even in my writings, I try very hard to retain a hard edge to the writing. By the way, if you want to do fiction, one great proponent, probably the greatest proponent of the hard edge, is a writer called Hemingway. I don't know if you've ever read Hemingway. He is one of the proponents of this hard edge writing. Get rid of all extraneous language. You just have what you need to tell the story.
Yeah. Okay, sir.
So the same thing. Same thing is true of films that I like, and I like a slight rawness to it.
So, second last question. Your top 3 Bengali movies, top 3 non-Indian movies, and top 3 Indian movies, or favorite, if you can.
It'll become now difficult. I remember. Well, some of them will be quite obvious. They're all Bengali films. Are all old movies. So and Hirok Raja Deshe, Gupi Gain Bagabain, and Shonar Killa.
Okay.
All made by the same director, not surprisingly.
Yeah.
None of them are from anything afterwards.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, the movies I like in more recent times are much more recent movies. So I really like Kantara. I mean, there are many ones I'd like, and apples and oranges. So picking 3 is very random because I know, in recent times I really liked watching Kantara. I had liked watching Kashmir Files was a great film.
Yeah.
Then what other good films have I watched? I think out of English films, one of my all-time favorites is Lawrence of Arabia. Another great film is Master and Commander. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
No.
So there are all kinds of films. I can't say there is one above the other. I mean, there are lots of films.
How do you like the Gladiator, Bahubali stuff?
I like that too. I actually like Gladiator, Bahubali. As I said, I like action.
Yeah.
And, but it has to be intelligent. It's just Jabardasti Guza Diya that I don't like.
Yeah.
It has to have a storyline. That's why I like Master and Commander. Watch it if you can.
Okay.
It is very well made, really well researched into that period.
I see.
I mean, see, you really get a feel of the life of an 18th century European ship.
I see. Okay.
Real flavor of that.
I see.
That. So, in fact, I am willing to overlook slow movement if enough research and it makes sense.
Yeah.
I'll
Vivid
give you another.
details.
So I'll give you a rare occasion of a slow film that I actually like. Shatranj Ke Khiladi. Okay, why do I like it? First of all, unbelievable detailing.
Yeah.
You really get a feel of that period. Secondly, the slowness is the satire. Sheer absurdity of these two chess players in the middle of the 1857 or just before the 1857 revolt. You know, living in this effete situation. So the slowness of it is the humor.
Yeah. Exactly.
So that is somewhere where it fits.
Yeah.
But there are many places where obviously it doesn't. But generally speaking, I like fast-paced thing, and where I'm not also a great fan of old Hindi films generally. I prefer the more recent movies because I think even though there were films that I used to like when I had originally watched them, but when I rewatched them in more recent times, they looked ridiculous.
Right.
Maybe because we have now find cardboard sets, etc.,
Yeah.
being ridiculous,
Yeah.
and overacting that
Right.
was. The villains look too ridiculous,
Yeah.
be even threatening.
Yeah.
But there was a time when I knew dialogues from Sholay off the top of my head. So,
Okay. Now, so then the last question: which is mightier, the pen or the sword?
I think you cannot. One without the other is meaningless. So waving your sword around, you see, the guy who writes the pen is mighty in the sense that you provide the ideas, ideologies, etc., for which the sword is then wielded. Randomly wielding around a sword ultimately will break down because you yourself will lose interest in why another am I doing this. And even if you succeed for a short period, it will not be continued because ultimately the sword, and the greater point about the sword is wielding of power only happens because a large number of people are willing to go along with you.
Yeah.
And they will not go along with you just because you are threatening them. They will go along with you because there is some intellectual reason that you have to provide. So therefore, the pen is an important part. But on the other hand, if you only have the pen, then you're just intellectualizing. So you do need to pay attention to the fact that you have. So in my, if you have to take an idea and implement it. It's great to write academic papers, but you have to actually try it out in policy and see what happens. If I had to implement it in the world of economics, let's say, so it's not good enough to write academic papers. You have to implement. Then both the sword of implementation and having actually succeeded. That is where the success or failure of the idea really, the rubber hits the road.
Right. Okay, sir. So thank you so much for coming to my podcast. Thank you so much for giving your time, and hope to see you back soon. And I have many more things to ask you from so many different topics.
Yeah, we will do it next time. We will definitely try and do that, and maybe we'll meet in person when I'm in Kolkata next.
That would be very great, very much.
And maybe we can go and have coffee in coffee house. Where we can read out the passages from that story.
Yeah, that would be fun. Thank you, sir.
Okay, bye.
Thank you, sir.
जय जय हे महिष